But I guess I'm challenging that because I grew up in Singapore, and I think Singapore in many ways has one of the freest markets on the economic side.
Yeah.
And yet they use a very heavy-handed form of government to keep it free. And those two things seem to go very much hand in hand in this country. In some ways, economically, I think, and financially, Singapore is freer than the United States. I mean, if you look at Heritage Foundation, they break it up into economic and social freedom. And yet that is done, or that is achieved through the use of very heavy-handed government.
I'm very puzzled you would say that. So I do have a paper in Singapore, and I've read the entire Lee Kuan Yew autobiography. What he himself said was that he was really envious of Hong Kong not having fewer democratic checks. He said he could implement more free market policies if Singapore were like Hong Kong. Now, his view was that public opinion and interest groups were preventing him from having as free market policies as he wanted. I agree that Singapore in a lot of ways has a freer market economy than the US does. But again, I would say that the things that the Singaporean economy is most noted for are ones where it would be very easy for them to do even less. For example, Singapore has a bunch of government-sponsored enterprises.
Correct.
It'd be really easy to have a small role for government. Just sell off the stock and divest. Right? They could totally do that. Right? And the same goes for things like the government healthcare system or the forced savings system. You could say, all right, well, we have a system of forced savings, and now we don't, and now it's tough luck, sink or swim. So I would say that the main policies of the Singaporean government, it wouldn't be hard for them to go and just do less, and they'd have a freer market. So I'm a little puzzled by which specific policies in Singapore you have in mind.
Well, in terms of things like industrial policy or just a lot of state-owned enterprises, like you said.
So how does that get? So how is that giving Singapore a more free market economy?
No, it's not. But by many measures, the economy in Singapore is freer. Like people tend to find it easier to build businesses there, to do business there.
Right. But like on the Heritage Index.
And there's no capital gains tax. There's no, taxes in general are very low. There's almost no welfare, with the exception of housing, which is 80% public housing. So it's a very strange contradiction. I only bring that up because it seems like the narrative in Singapore is that you do need some sort of government or heavy-handed government to kind of keep things free economically. Right.
So again, like in those indexes that you were mentioning, like Heritage, Singapore is losing points for those state enterprises. So Singapore is getting high scores despite that because they do so well in other areas.
Okay.
So I mean, I still don't think it makes any sense to say that the heavy government is giving Singapore a freer economy. I'd say rather that if you compare Singapore to other economies, you'll see that Singapore does so much better in some areas that they can get mediocre scores in others and still get a high overall score. I mean, I say, Singapore, I'd say it's like a student getting A minuses, even though they are out drinking right before the big test. All right. And it's like, well, so they need to be drinking before the big test to get those A minuses. Like, no, they don't. If they would stop drinking, they would be getting an A or A plus. It is really impressive that they're able to get an A minus when drunk the day before the exam, but that's different from the drinking caused the success. I mean, this is one where it's just by the construction of the index, like that stuff cannot matter unless somehow by having a government-owned airline that does something else that raises other parts of the score indirectly, but logically possible. I'm not a huge expert on the Singaporean economy. I knew enough to write one academic paper on it. And I'll say that I did find out basically everything I could find out about public opinion in Singapore and public support for their policies. But that's where I stand there.